And hi, everybody. Welcome to Fred the Show here on WSPA Plus. Well, we are recording on the first day of July 2025 as we count down to the 4th of July. And it's obviously a significant holiday for our entire country, but especially here in South Carolina, we've got the perfect guest to talk about why that is. I'm joined by Durant Ashmore. To say he's an American Revolutionary War historian doesn't begin to touch it. He's a native of Greenville County. That doesn't even begin to describe what we're going to tell you about his story, but Durant is the man to talk to about South Carolina and the American Revolution. First of all, Durant, thank you for being here today.
Well, Fred, I appreciate you having me.
It's a pleasure to have you, and I've not revealed the episode title of this show because it's something you very commonly talk about when it comes to geography and the American Revolutionary War.
Well, that's certainly true. You know, the Revolutionary War started in Boston, and Saratoga was the turning point. And the Revolutionary War ended at Yorktown, but the Revolutionary War was won in South Carolina.
And why really was that? First of all, is this true? Two things. Number one, were there more battles credited to South Carolina in the American Revolution than there were in any other state?
Well, New Jersey and South Carolina do have a little bit of an argument going on over that, and it's hard to define what a battle is, what an event is, what an instance is. But South Carolina is definitely at the top of the list when it comes to Revolutionary War battles, and the backcountry of South Carolina is way up there as well.
We're going to talk about that extensively, and also a lot of people might be surprised by this, is that there was a significantly larger number of battles or encounters in the American Revolution than there were years later in the Civil War.
Well, that's certainly true as well. You know, it's a little confusing, but we talk about our Civil War. It was a war between the states, but our Revolutionary War was a true Civil War, neighbor fighting neighbor.
Let's talk about South Carolina's role. Why was this state so significant? And I know it was something that stretched from the Low Country in Charleston all the way up to very decisively in our area.
Well, that's exactly true. In the North, where it started, it turned into a stalemate after June of 1778. The last major battle in the North was the Battle of Monmouth. But their forces, they realized that they were in a stalemate in the North, and they thought that if they came south, then they could roll up the soft underbelly of the Patriot forces. And that's when Savannah fell on December the 30th of 1778, and the British had a toehold in the South. And it became so important. Cornwallis was here. He fought battle after battle. While he was technically victorious in some of these battles, he was strategically a loser, because after these significant battles in South Carolina, the British had to retreat after every time.
Where did the first real official blood unfortunately shed in this conflict?
Well, that was right here in the backcountry of South Carolina. That was at 96, in the first siege of 96, which is November 19th to 21st, 1775. Now, this is 7 months before the Declaration of the Independence. But there was a campaign underway in the backcountry, the Snow Campaign. This is a incident involving the Cherokees and the Patriots and the Loyalists. And the Loyalists, who had captured a shipment of shot and gunpowder that was intended for the Cherokees, they holed up in 96, and armies, Loyalist armies, Patriot armies, stood off at 96, and that is where the first blood was shed in the south of Lexington and Concord.
It's a fascinating subject to delve into, and you've kind of mentioned it. If you could maybe expand a little bit. There was a war against the British but there were Loyalists involved on the British side. There was a Continental Army eventually with militia. I mean, this was several groups that came together to go against one another.
Well, there were. It was very divided in the entire state of South Carolina. Many say that a third of the populace was Loyalist, a third was Patriot, and a third just didn't care. Others say it was half Loyalist and half Patriot, which, is pretty much the case. South Carolina turned over 3 times during the American Revolution.
Wow.
And when an area turns over, it is the world turned upside down. And the people who had been at the receiving end of oppression now were ascendant, and they were taking out on their enemies retribution. And it became very bitter, very bitter.
How did the Continental Army, the militia, how did they score their first victory against the British?
Well, in South Carolina, that would have been at the Battle of Sullivan's Island, which we have just celebrated, June 28th of 1776, Carolina Day, when the British sent an armada into Charleston Harbor, 11 ships of the line, and they were taking on an unfinished fort on Sullivan's Island, Fort Moultrie, and the British anchored their ships, and as a result of that, they became sitting ducks. But they had 360 cannons on those ships versus about 30 at Sullivan's Island. And the accuracy of the Patriot gunners just blew those British ships to pieces.
We are going to talk about Daniel Morgan coming up very, very shortly, but can you talk about some of those leaders who made such a difference? Thomas Sumter, Francis Marion, there are 2 names that jumped immediately to mind.
Well, certainly. And, Francis Marion, he was ascendant in the Petey area, Thomas Sumter in the mid part of the state, and Andrew Pickens in the back country in particular. When Charleston fell, May the 12th, 1780, now that really was the world turned upside down. And the British quickly established forts in Georgetown, Camden, 96, and Augusta. And there was very little opposition. The British had conquered 95% of the state. And Thomas Sumter had banded together patriots who were in opposition to what was going on. And he had a camp of 1,000 men in the Catawba Indian Reservation. Charles McDowell from North Carolina was on the South Carolina-North Carolina border in Spartanburg County, and he had a camp of about 300 or 400 men. This was the only opposition to British rule at that time. This is before Francis Marion entered the fray because he had a severely broken ankle, and he wasn't able to take the field until August of 1780. So these men were experienced. They had fought in the French and Indian War in the 1760s. They were well respected. They were backcountry woodsmen, and they led the charge against the British forces.
Were the British, in their history as a military, were they used at all to fighting battles like these in a war like this one?
To a limited degree, because they were the forces in the French and Indian War, so they had that experience. And Marion, Sumter, and Pickens all adopted Indian techniques. The ambushes, for instance, along the ways of the Cherokees, for instance. So they had that experience. But as far as the set piece European style of fighting, which they favored and they used very successfully in the North, they weren't able to be as successful in the South with those techniques.
I want to depart from this part of the conversation for a moment just to find out a little bit about your history. When I mentioned you're a Greenville County native, your family dates back many, many generations.
Well, exactly, and the Ashmores were the first pioneer settlers in Greenville County. We're in the 1790 census. And my lineage does go back a little bit further than that. I'm named after Henry Durant, and Henry Durant was one of Marion's men, and I'm proud to claim that heritage.
And now you spend a lot of time, I know you are a lecturer, I know you're a very, very popular one. When you see crowds today, when they come out to see you, what are some of the things that they might be surprised about that either maybe they didn't know about the American Revolutionary War or maybe forgotten since our school days?
Well, I have always been interested in history, but it's really for the past 5 or 6 years that I've been delving on this subject in a overwhelming way, I guess you may say. And I remember what I learned and the thoughts that I had when I learned these particular facts that I'd kind of glossed over through my life, and how distinctive and different this was from sort of, the everyday thoughts about the American Revolution. But in South Carolina, there were two different groups. There were the coastal elites, the Rice Kings, these men of massive fortunes with huge plantations, 400 slaves each. They had their particular reasons for wanting independence from England. In the back country, however, this was the frontier of America. The Treaty of Saluda in 1755 opened up the backcountry, the 96th district, 10 western counties in South Carolina, opened those up for development. Greenville, Anderson, Pickens, and Oconee counties were all Cherokee territory. It was illegal for a European man to be there except unless he had a passport, and this was for the traders. But in the backcountry, the issue was security. The settlers were here for prosperity, and without security, there is no prosperity. The English won a huge victory in the French and Indian War when they ran the French out of North America. And that was an extremely expensive undertaking, an expensive war, and that's when the British started, the taxes, the taxation without representation. But in the backcountry, we needed security, and the British colonial government was failing in that regard. And that's why the regulator movement arose in the 1760s, and that's a major reason that the American Revolution occurred in the 1770s.
Well, we are going to talk about how the war turned significantly in South Carolina. We're also going to talk about a place that's a very, very close drive for really anybody in our area to really get to experience that and much more. Durant Ashmore is our guest here on Fred the Show. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Fred the Show. I'm joined by Durant Ashmore, an American Revolutionary War historian. We've talked about South Carolina and the state's role in the American Revolutionary War. And obviously, first of all, if you are living in this part of the country, you're surrounded by battlefields, aren't you?
It's amazing, and this is one thing that I learned. I had really no idea about this. But within 50 miles of where we are right here, there are 100 Revolutionary War battlefields. When you travel the I-85 corridor, 25 miles of either side of that corridor, 100 battlefields. And it's not like these aren't the most important battlefields of the war. Musgrove Mill, Kings Mountain, Cowpens, 96. These were crucial battles that led to the future of our country.
Let's talk about one in particular. You just mentioned it, the Battle of Cowpens, which I was surprised to learn. Is this correct? That battle lasted perhaps an hour at the most?
Oh, no, that's incorrect.
Okay.
18 minutes.
18 minutes, my goodness.
Yes, 18 minutes. Some people claim, nobody claims it lasted more than 30 minutes. But there was a lot of moving parts to Cowpens. Cowpens is a fascinating battle, and it shows the genius of Daniel Morgan. The Battle of Cowpens is taught to this day at West Point. Defense in depth, the eye that he had for choosing that particular battlefield, it's just brilliant in so many regards. And he established a battle plan that was adopted for the remainder of the war. Nathaniel Greene wasn't at Cowpens, but he utilized Morgan's tactics at Guilford Courthouse and at Utah Springs as well.
Can you go specifically into those tactics and what made it so different? I think you may have alluded to some of them earlier.
Right, and so for one, he utilized the South Carolina militia better than any other commander had. He knew the limitations of the militia, but he also knew the advantages of the militia. So he had a skirmish line set up. He had Joseph McDowell and his North Carolina sharpshooters on the right flank, and he had Samuel Hammond and South Carolina and Georgia sharpshooters on the left flank. And as Tarleton marched his army up on the morning of June 17th, 1781, the sharpshooters started picking off their leaders. They were aiming for the Appomattox. They forced the British to transfer from column formation to line formation. They slowed the British down, but eventually the British overwhelmed, the skirmishers, and under orders they retreated through the second line. The second line was the South Carolina militia. And this was the South Carolina militia's finest hour. There were 4 regiments under Andrew Pickens lined up. You had Thomas Brandon and the 2nd Spartan Regiment on the left flank. You had Joseph Hayes and the Little River Regiment next. Now, this is Lawrence County. You had John Thomas Jr. and the 1st Spartan Regiment, 3rd in line. And then you had Benjamin Roebuck, the commander of the Spartan Battalion, Roebuck's battalion of the Spartan Regiment. These 4 regiments. Now, Morgan had these set up on the crest of a depression. Now, they weren't at the topographical crest, they were at the military crest, which meant that they were half hidden. And as Tarleton moved his forces forward, they on the left flank, he let loose with a volley. And there was a line of dead redcoats laying on the field where that happened.
Unbelievable.
John Thomas Jr., he let through a volley, another line of dead redcoats. Joseph Hayes, he lets through his volley. Benjamin Roebuck, he lets loose his volley. 4 lines of redcoats laying on the field, and the gravediggers were remarking over this. This is where the British had their greatest number of casualties. Thomas Brandon was able to get off a 5th volley, and then he retreated under orders. When Tarleton saw that, he thought that the battle was over and the militia was running away, because he had done just that at Camden a few months earlier. And he sent the 17th Light Dragoons. This is the best cavalry unit that the British had. He sent them attacking the retreating militia. And when William Washington saw that, the cavalry commander of the Patriots, George Washington's second cousin once removed, the best cavalryman in the American Revolution, with his 80 men of the 3rd Continental Light Dragoons, they caught the 17th Light Dragoons in an oblique attack. And of the 50 men who started with the 17th Light Dragoons, 13 of them were killed. Yeah. And again, now, Tarleton thinks that he is winning the battle, and he crests that crest there. And all of a sudden, he's faced with the Continental Army itself. The 1st and 2nd Maryland regiments, the Kirkwoods Delawareans, Virginia Continentals, and Virginia militia. this is the point where the British ran in a riot, like a mob, into the teeth of that Continental line. And quickly, there was a double envelopment. The militia came back onto the field, captured the right flank or left flank of the British, and William Washington was on the right flank and the Continental in the center. And so it was over in 18 minutes.
18 minutes, amazing. I would imagine that you would recommend that people visit the Cowpens National Battlefield. It's only about 8 miles off Interstate 85, off of exit 83. What would be your recommendations as far as seeing the Cowpens National Battlefield?
It's just lovely. It's definitely my favorite battlefield. I will tell you that when I go to Cowpens, I tour that site in reverse. I tour from the viewpoint of Tarleton as he's approaching and seeing what he doesn't see. What he doesn't see is that Continental Army, on the opposite side of the crest of that hill. And it just really brings home what these men went through.
And it's a free place to go for families to enjoy. Their park is open daily from 9 to 5. The visitor center is open 3 days a week for people to go and enjoy it. We've just got a few minutes left, and I don't want to kind of blow through the end of the war, but if you can tell me, obviously Kings Mountain was significant, and how did Kings Mountain take us eventually to Yorktown?
Well, what is significant, and one thing that's overlooked, and one thing that I think is very important, is the Battle of Musgrove Mill. Now, Musgrove Mill occurred on the day of the worst Patriot forces in South Carolina. We lost at Camden August 16th, 1780. It was a terrible defeat, horrible. 2 days later, Thomas Sumter got thoroughly whipped bad at Fishing Creek. But on that day, there was Musgrove Mill, where 200 Patriots defeated 500 Loyalists. And that was a ray of hope. And that battle just really rubbed Cornwallis wrong. So he wanted to take over North Carolina, and he moved into Charlotte. And he sent Patrick Ferguson on his left flank, and he had James Weems on his right flank. And Ferguson, was there to overcome the Over Mountain men. The Over Mountain men fought at Musgrove Mill, and that did not sit well with the British. So when the Over Mountain men and the North Carolina militia and the South Carolina militia got word that Patrick Ferguson was on the move, they banded together. They camped at Cowpens the night before the battle. They were able to surround Patrick Ferguson sitting up on that mountain. He thought he had an impregnable position, but the rifles, the armaments of the Revolutionary War are crucial to how the battles developed. And Kings Mountain was perfectly set up for the backwoods riflemen. They had a range of 200 yards, and they were able to pick off Ferguson and his men armed with muskets, who had an effective 80-yard range, and because they were on top of the hill, they fired over the heads of the Patriots as they were attacking. And there were about 900 men on each side. There were well over 100 men killed on the Loyalist end, and those 700 men were now captured and marched towards the prison camps in Virginia. They never made it, and that's a different story. Yeah. But during this time, because Gates had lost so bad at Camden, George Washington sent down a Third Continental Army, and he didn't mess around this time. He sent the best of the best, Light Horse Harry Lee, William Washington, Nathaniel Greene. That's what led to Cowpens.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you, Durant. recounting just some of what South Carolina saw during the American Revolutionary War. I've got just about a minute to go. What would be your thoughts to let people know that while we'll celebrate our 250th anniversary birthday as a country next year, that there was battles and things happening 250 years ago this year that had a significant impact?
Well, certainly was, and it started very early in South Carolina. I mean, we were the first in the South who fought back against what Britain was doing, and it's a legacy that we can and should be proud of.
Well, Durant Ashmore, very quickly, how can people learn more about some of your knowledge?
Well, I'm on Facebook, and so anybody who wants to friend me on Facebook, I welcome that. That's where I really put out most of my information, and it's kind of the best way to get in touch with me. I'm also an advisor and consultant at the Lawrence County Museum, and there's a lot going on in Lawrence County, as there is throughout the entire backcountry of South Carolina. We are building a state-of-the-art Revolutionary War exhibit in Lawrence, and it will be ready by July 28th of 1776.
We will look forward to that. We'll have to revisit with you when that comes about. Durant Ashmore, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Fred. I appreciate it.
Thank you. That's this edition of Fred the Show here on WSPA Plus. We'll see you again next time.